Welcome back. I should say, welcome back to myself. In reality, it's been a long time since I was last behind the mic, in front of the camera, to give myself, but to give anyone that takes their time to listen to this a new episode of Sabres Chat with myself, Luka. Um, the season's already started. I'm recording this Tuesday, October 8th in the evening for a timestamp purpose. It's currently 5-2 Florida Panthers at the end of two periods. If you want to know where I stand in time with the landscape of the NHL and currently what has taken place, that is where we're at right now. What has also happened is the Sabres have already gotten the season going with two games overseas in Prague, where, quite simply put, they fell on their face. No, it didn't go well. That's for sure. It was abysmal. The first game, I can't even say the first night, since it was 1 o'clock in the afternoon for the Friday game, and then Saturday was a 10 a.m. Eastern local time puck drop for that game. But the first game was miserable, and I mean that in all of the negative ways possible. It actually blew my mind when I looked at the stat sheet and saw that the Sabres finished the night, or, well, I guess for local time purposes, it is the night, but finished the night out shooting New Jersey 31-23. Because anyone watching that game with their own two eyes could tell you that the Devils dominated, and I do mean dominated, the Sabres for 60 minutes. The effort was just not there. The first takeaway I have from the Sabres performance during that game was that, quite literally, with that effort, they were gliding around at times. I mean, and it wasn't like it was just your average guys on the roster, your role players. You saw your Alex Tucks, your Tage Thompsons, your Rasmus Dahlins gliding around, waiting for play, doing things that when the hire of Lindy Ruff happened, you heard a lot about accountability and how they wanted to be a faster and yet also more physical presence, harder to play against. Well, first meaningful game in, it was very much the opposite. What we experienced and what we watched as fans was this team just not doing what they need to do for winning hockey. It was sad. It was an incredibly difficult watch. Um, I'm embarrassed to say that I watched it from beginning to end. Now, the excitement and everything of the season starting died within the opening 10 minutes or so, when you realized that what we were watching was just a very, very lethargic team out there on the ice, compared to, all credit, a very high energy, physical New Jersey team that wanted to play, that was ready to play, and was willing to do the things needed to get the win on the day. And it's, I imagine that Lindy himself had some choice words for all of the dressing room after the fact. The thing that kind of sucks following that game is that you have to turn around and play in less than 24 hours. So there's nothing you're really going to do on the ice that drives a message across. You kind of just got to pick it right back up where you left off, essentially, and that's a bummer. And I think that's kind of what rolled into that second game, where they ended up losing 3-1. And I'll get into that second game in a second here, but overall, when the first game finished, and that performance, that I don't need to highlight anything really truly specifically. Too many giveaways, loose with the puck. No one could string together a pass for the life of them. And again, to the skating and effort part, it just lacked. It was nowhere close. I mean, the Sabres, if you're looking, the Sabres were here, the Devils were here. and the Sabres could never close that gap. They didn't even look like they wanted to try to close that gap. I think to pull the curtain back, what you saw was in a meaningful game, unlike the preseason where I think it's so low stress that you're kind of just you're willing to just do whatever it is that the coaching staff's asking, but you understand and recognize that no one on that ice at that moment, whether it's on your team or against you, is putting in a full, we'll call it a full effort, because you're trying to manage your minutes, get through the preseason healthy, get to these meaningful games now in the regular season at full strength. So that is why that is fake hockey. You get to the real hockey, tendencies and things we saw from this roster, from this team under Donnie Granato came to light. And I think what's even worse is you could maybe even see where messages were being crossed in their own heads, where this is the system we're trying to achieve. This is what we're trying to do physically on the ice. That is the Lindy system. But then all of these things you've been doing for years, that was the Don Granato system. Those tendencies and those things, those messages are also in the moment on the fly, bleeding into your brain and bleeding into your thought process while out there, that you're caught in your between two thoughts. You're caught between a rock and a hard place. And overall, you even give a worse performance than anything it felt like we saw even in a disappointing season last year and from years past. So the first game just was an ultimate letdown from a fan's perspective. I was Thankfully it was mid-work day. Let's put it that way. You're mid-work day, you're excited about the season started. You see you see that product on the ice, and yeah, the distraction of work was a good thing. It's a very rare moment on a Friday where you're happy to be working, because in that moment, if you weren't working, the only thing you'd be doing is watching this game, and that's just sad. And it feels like a waste of time, to be quite honest. But we're all here. We love this team. Of course, we're going to watch it through and through. And just the disappointment overall of the first game going very, very south very quickly was there. Rolling into this second game now, the reason I mentioned the effort and such, and how it sucked that this team didn't really have the opportunity, or Lindy didn't really have the opportunity to take this team and do something to drive a message across going into the following game due to the short time span that you have in between the two, is I think you saw a better performance. As much as it may not feel like it when you lose 3-1. The first period, it was scoreless. And what I will say this is, the passes were still off, and it felt like no one understood how to leave their own defensive zone, no matter who it was, whether it was just an individual behind the net trying to set up play, or you were able to finally obtain the puck from some devil's possession and need to transition it out into the neutral zone. None of these passes were connecting, it felt like. But at least the skating and effort looked better. The bar was so low from game one that it would have been really bad if it had somehow maintained itself there and or got worse. But luckily it did not. It got better. You could see at least a little bit. Let's put it this way. If at least pride was being represented on the ice, and these players cared that what they just did the previous day was clearly not good enough, a message I would imagine was given to them from Lindy, and then they stepped to the occasion in a sense of showing that they did want to put in the effort or try to, and then maybe get a win rather than the loss, or at least put in a much better performance. Was it a much better performance? No, but it was a better performance. It's why also stats don't tell the whole story, because whereas I mentioned that it shocked me in the first game, the Sabres actually outshot the Devils. I'm saying that it looked and appeared like the Sabres played a better second game, and yet they got outshot by the Devils 37-18. That is alarmingly awful, one. But two, I don't believe once again tells the story of that game. The Devils deserve to win. They still won the night physically and, most shifts. But the difference of being literally doubled up in shots, I don't think actually depicts how that game was for its entirety. And at least if that first night didn't happen, if that first game doesn't happen, and that was your first game of the season, I don't believe that myself, and I don't want to speak for others, but I looking at the Twitter sphere, talking to other fellow Sabres fans, I don't think we'd be as negative feeling wise about this team like we are for the collective 2 games in its entirety. And I think that's mostly the fault for the massive letdown that was the first game. The second game, I do not believe really provides as big of a letdown because at least effort was there. And then kind of another little bit light was Devin Levi had a good performance. I think Devin Levi showed that he is up for being an NHL caliber goalie. Finally, what we saw at the beginning of last season looked like was very erratic, and he was still not up to the speed of the top game. And the year down in Rochester, letting him develop and play and be comfortable feels like it worked out in the end. And what we're seeing this year already through 1 game is definitely a step up from what we saw last season. Now, can he continue to do that when called upon? Time will tell. But that first game, now that he is going to be with James Reimer, fun fact, news, James Reimer was, of course, claimed by Anaheim after being put on waivers to be sent down to Rochester. It's Devin Levi is your number 2 now. There is not going to be a third goalie coming into this mix. Thank God that philosophy and idea that was a Granato staple is gone, because I think that was a disaster on how to manage your goaltending position as a whole. This is UPL's team, but number 2 is Devin Levi. And in the modern game, you do need to have a dependable number 2. This isn't the era of the NHL where you can have a number 1 have 65 plus starts. That's just not feasible. Your number 1 should be hitting the 50 mark, but then your number 2 needs to pick up the load and kind of fill in everywhere needed to provide your number 1 enough breaks so that you can maintain success together. This is definitely a goaltending group that should be able to achieve that. Now, the play in front of them needs to be a lot better than what we've seen. Deep breath. Now, going into that a little bit bigger picture, I, as a fan, have just been making the internal joke that this team's just not built to play in Europe. Is that kind of tongue-in-cheek? Of course. But what's nice is following those 2 games, kind of following what feels like it's not a dress rehearsal, because those games matter. In the regular season now, the Sabres are 0-2. They have 0 points through 2 games. And they got goal differential. Doesn't truly matter that much, but effectively, you couldn't be any lower. What's nice is that comes as a quote-unquote dress rehearsal of meaningful games. You get this week off, or almost week off, until you're then in front of your home fans for what feels like kind of a second pseudo season opener, but it is truly your home opener Thursday night against the Kings. And you'd like to think that a Kings team coming all the way across to Buffalo, you should be able to take care of business there. Now, the Kings are a good team overall, but you should be able to compete with them. And what I hope to see is kind of I'm gonna say this. I want to see an overcorrection. I want to see almost like an over the top effort. I want to see something that looks like a completely different product, night and day difference from what we just experienced in Czechia. What we saw in Prague was just flat out not good. And it's not good enough to do anything. This team is going to regress massively if that continues. What I hope to see is, with this time in between there, Of course, Lindy and the coaching staff, I'm imagining, is doing a lot of work and it's putting in a lot of effort to drive across a lot of different things. But I would love to see, as a fan, a massive overcorrection in the level of effort and and the attention to detail with the passing, with the board work and everything in between, and how they're operating through the middle of the ice, that you almost feel like they need to slow down in order to be more successful at times. That to me then feels successful, because I feel like what we saw, if that were to continue, is going to be more difficult to build up from than if you were to, in this time span, overshoot the goal and then bring it back down and rein it, have, Lindy and the coaching staff rein it in and finally hit that level set where things are where they need them to be. And then they can kind of hit the ground running and hopefully find some success as the season progresses. The biggest thing that needs to change, and change quickly, though, is a theme that continues from last season, and that being special teams, and more specifically, the power play. If there's one particular detailed item that really hurts to see from this opening too, it's how abysmal the power play looked. It was a change of coaching staff. We have different guys behind the bench, different guys that were working with this unit and working with this team to achieve a lot of different things. One of those things you would have liked to have believed would come with that is a change in how they will operate the special teams. The message came out like, hey, Tage is no longer going to be sitting in his office just stagnant and static on his spot waiting for the one-timer. We're going to be operating as a unit. This is going to be a fluid power play. There is going to be a lot of chances coming from a lot of different places. Great. That message is welcomed, while also still having your Tage Thompson sit. You don't entirely ignore that shot. That shot is one of, if not the best in the NHL at what it does. But it all sounds great. What we just saw was a lot of the same shit where they don't know how to enter the zone. Now, New Jersey was quite literally squatting on the line and just welcoming the dump, which the Sabres had no desire to do. And I think that it was two philosophies colliding, where ultimately the skill couldn't prevail for the Sabres, and it just looked clunky trying to enter, gain zone entry and establish possession to get the power play units going. But that's the kind of adjustments and things you would like to see change from a more veteran coaching staff, recognizing something like that and being able to go, hey, this plan A isn't working. We're going to do this. What it felt like in the old Granado regime was, this is what we do, and this is when it works, is what works best. We're going to continue to do this. The problem is, when you get countered, you don't have a counter punch to that. You don't have an answer. Lindy, being a very, very experienced coach, of course, and the staff that he has trusted to be surrounded by, you would like to think he'd understand the concept of something like that. Something we've seen where there would be certain nights where he'd lean on power play unit 1, and then some nights he would lean on power play unit 2, just based on the first couple looks he got, or how they're even looking at 5-on-5 and which guys seem to be having their night. It didn't quite feel like that. It felt like the old power play was still here to play. That needs to change right here, right now. That is the one thing where, if we get to this opener, if I'm sitting in that seat and I'm watching the same old shit we just saw on TV, these first two games, the same old shit we saw all last season, I am going to be very, very disappointed. Now, losing JJ Peterka to a concussion, who's currently day-to-day, is not great for the situation that is the power play and 5-on-5 scoring, that matter. Someone that was up in the elite category last season in 5-on-5 scoring, but you have still enough talent at your disposal that you should be able to run and operate an operable power play. Doesn't need to be elite, Just needs to be needs to be effective. It needs to yearn results. That what we saw is not going to do it. A lot of things were not going to do it, but that definitely will not do it. I wish I had some positive takeaways, but naturally, if you watch those games, of course, there are no positive takeaways really to come from that beyond, hey, Devin Levi might finally look pro ready for at least a backup secondary role, which is perfectly fine, understanding where he is in his development, how old he is, so on and so forth. So it's things need to change. I feel like Dahlin getting the C is awesome. Now he needs to continue to put the effort like we've seen in years past, not what we just saw in these first two games. I think that there's definitely a learning curve situation going on right now. This is I will give them a pass in the sense of it's culture shock. You're going from the ultimate kind of players coach, it's okay philosophy, you know, running gun style, offense is all that matters. If, bubble that is Don Granado into a structured, accountable, four lines, just tr- true effort hockey that is Lindy Ruff style. And what I very much look forward to now seeing these first two games in that sense moving forward is when does this accountability environment start to show itself with what I will call performance-based healthy benchings mid-game. Things we saw back in the original Lindy regime, things you saw with Lindy elsewhere when he was coaching in Dallas, when he was coaching in New Jersey. If it's just not your night and you are just not doing your job, Lindy has no shame in benching you. We know that for a fact as fans. When is that going to finally show itself? Is he giving it, let's say, a 10-game evaluation period where he truly wants to kind of see where it's just not saying specifically because of a lot of, notable reasons, but say Tage Thompson just having a one-off night, or is this a trend and I need to bench him to send a message? I would say projecting moving forward as we're sitting here and the Sabres have home to the Kings, home to the Panthers, which again, Panthers on Banner Rise night are giving the absolute business to Boston right now. 5-2 still, early third period. At Pittsburgh, at Columbus, at Chicago. Those are your next 5 games right now. Are you going to win 5 of those games? Probably not. Florida being the most difficult test by far. I mean, you want to talk about a mismatch. Florida matches up well against a Boston. We all know how they match up against the Sabres. It's not a great one. But Los Angeles, like I said, good team. Sabres should be able to compete. At Pittsburgh, I think that's where the Sabres should actually be able to perform well, because based on what we're seeing here, this team speed does feel like it's gotten a little bit better here. Pittsburgh definitely lacks a little bit of team speed. Columbus, due to some unfortunate circumstances, of course, but overall, the roster is not that great. Should be able to take care of business. At Chicago, Connor Bedard is Connor Bedard, and he is awesome. They're still retooling that roster. It has gotten better, but again, should be a competitive game. Can this team now coming up be competitive and be competitive regularly and put together stretch of play that is so far away from what we just experienced overseas that it reforms the hope inside of us as fans that bringing in a Lindy Ruff did? And can we see what Lindy Ruff and Kevin Adams have been telling us in the sense of accountability is going to be observed within the dressing room, and a more fast physical play is going to be seen night in, night out. This is going to be a tougher team to play, so on and so forth. Is Lindy going to be able to elevate this roster to bring success in games against the likes of the Kings, against the likes of the Penguins on the road. I believe it's possible. I think this break that we're currently sitting in the middle of is good for this roster. And at the end of the day, the message I want to get across, the reason for this episode, the title of this episode is that it's just been 2 games. Still a lot of season. The title being, now the season really begins. It's not that it already hasn't. It's that, okay, lesson learned. This is make or break. This is where we truly understand if the message is getting across, what the message may be. Is Lindy good enough to do what we need him to do to this roster, to this squad? Or is this squad just plain and simple not good enough? Lindy's just not good enough? Is it going to be too bumpy out the gates where things are going to get lost early? And unfortunately, we are already going to be staring down the barrel of yet another season without playoffs. I don't want to be that person that said I was going into this year fully expecting it, but you want to get that monkey off your back. And a move like firing Don Granato, who just wasn't good enough, and bringing in a Lindy Ruff and reshuffling the deck more with your bottom 6 forwards feels like something where you're trying to get over the hump finally. They may need to address certain other things as the season progresses, but you need to find early success in order to kind of to essentially tell you that it's going to be worth it to go for it, to make that push. Because I think pressure is definitely there on Kevin Adams to get over the hump, get this team into the postseason. And if the opportunity were to arise, if a situation where the Sabres can finally, right the ship, go in a positive direction and show that they are going to be competitive throughout the season, he will do the things that he absolutely has the resources to do to maybe make a move, address potentially a top 6 forward, like a lot of fans hope could exist on this roster that isn't quite there yet. Go address maybe beefing up the blue line a little bit more, like it feels like it needs to. I do like the blue line. I don't love it. It's one of those things where I think it's fully capable of being very solid, but it absolutely could be better. So the season's not lost. The message is quite simply, let's enjoy the home opener. That's game number 3 of 82. It is a long season. Hopefully it doesn't feel like a long season. That is ultimately what I know a lot of us as fans were experiencing after Saturday's result. But thankfully, I'm not recording right after that game. Thankfully, I had a couple days. Things reset, things mild down, kind of temper down. And ultimately, we sit here and it's like, hey, hockey's back. Let's be happy about it. It's back in North America for the Sabres finally, coming this Thursday, October 10th, hosting the Kings. I know I'll be there. I'm excited to kind of see hockey in front of me once again. It feels way too long since the last time I was able to enjoy it. So thanks for, listening to this latest edition of Sabres Chat. I will be back every other Wednesday with a new episode. We're back in the swing of things. It's regular season hockey time. By that point in time, when I will be back, let me just look at this here. We would have just understood what had happened as they came back from that 3-game road trip I described. And there was a home game against Dallas. And boy, let's cross our fingers and hope that they were able to string together at least a few games, more than a couple games of successful hockey, winning hockey. And we can feel like these tragic losses in Prague are long distant past, and we can move forward in the hopes that this massive drought of missing the playoffs can finally come to an end. Be sure to give me a follow on Twitter at Sabres Chat Pod. I love to tweet during games, even if I'm at them. I try to tweet maybe, a handful of times. Who I'm with definitely helps or hurts that situation. Sometimes I'm just having quality time with my wife. Other times, I'm with friends. We shall see. But even when I'm sitting at home watching games, I love to tweet during the games, whether it's tongue in cheek, funny stuff, or more just serious thoughts on the game. Share my thoughts on breaking news or anything else that might come about. But if you like meme play as well, just want to simply see some funny memes once in a while of either a depressed fan's moment or an overly excited fan, give it a follow on X, formerly Twitter, at Sabres Chat Pod. Also, feel free to subscribe to the YouTube channel if you're not already. I know it is Josh and myself with our Bills Chat podcast. We love to put out a bunch of great content where it's, of course, our main flagship podcast every Monday morning about the Bills. Josh also likes to put out some quick hits and quick chat videos. He will do halftime shows. You'll also see my Luka's Locks NFL best bets week in, week out. Not doing great at the moment. 1-1-1 this past week. The Jags just couldn't hold a 14-point lead late in the fourth somehow, but at least they got the push for us. Hoping to turn that ship around, but excited for Sabres hockey to be back, even with it being as miserable as it was those first couple games. Excited, though, really excited to be back in the KeyBank Center watching our Sabres first take on the Kings, but take on a plenty more games moving forward. But until next time, I am Luka. This is Sabres Chat with myself. You all have a great rest of your morning, day, evening, whenever you're tuning in, and I will see you in a couple weeks. Take care.